The day Tokyo feared the P-51 Mustang. Part 1. The fighter that changed the war. Imagine looking through the cockpit at over 9,000 meters and seeing absolutely nothing but the ocean. In every direction there is only water. No ships, no islands, no place to land if the engine stops. The fuel needle slowly drops while the constant roar of the Merlin engine fills your ears. You grip the stick, adjust your oxygen mask, and glance again at the empty horizon. You are still hundreds of kilometers from Japan. For the first time, a small group of American pilots is about to do the impossible. They aren't just bombing Japan, they are escorting bombers to Tokyo. For the first time, the sky over the capital of the Japanese Empire will no longer belong only to the Japanese. In a few hours, thousands will realize a new phase of the war has begun. And when those sleek silver fighters appear, nothing will ever be the same. For over 3 years, the Pacific was a battlefield where distance meant power. Japan believed its geography was a natural fortress. Even as Americans took new islands, thousands of kilometers of ocean remained. This distance was a weapon. B-29 bombers could reach Japan, but their escorts had to turn back. This meant bombers faced Japanese fighters and flak alone. Japanese commanders believed this was permanent. They were wrong. Meanwhile, the U.S. was undergoing an unprecedented industrial transformation. Car factories made planes. Shipyards launched vessels at unimaginable speeds. Thousands of engineers perfected engines and aircraft. The war would be won by superior machines. Among them was a plane no one initially thought would make history, the P-51 Mustang. The Mustang was born almost by accident. Developed for the British, it had extraordinary aerodynamics, but limitations at high altitude. Everything changed when British engineers suggested the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. In the U.S., Packard built it under license. The result was spectacular. The Mustang became fast, efficient at altitude, fuel economical, and able to fly farther than any other fighter. Suddenly, the impossible seemed inevitable. But an extraordinary plane wasn't enough. They needed a place to take off. That place was Iwo Jima. From above, Iwo Jima looked insignificant, a small volcanic island with Mount Suribachi and black sand. But strategists knew its value. Located halfway between the Marianas and Japan, it was a vital early warning station for Tokyo. For Americans, taking it meant a door into Japan's heart. The Japanese knew this. They turned Iwo Jima into a fortress. Under General Kuribayashi, kilometers of tunnels were dug. Concrete bunkers linked artillery and command centers. Kuribayashi forbade suicide beach attacks, planning to bleed the Americans dry meter by meter. When Marines landed on February 19, 1945, they found hell. Volcanic sand bogged down tanks. Men sank to their ankles. Hidden guns and tunnels made for a brutal month of cave-by-cave fighting. Thousands died. But when it ended, the United States had a bridgehead to Japan. Days later, engineers repaired the strips. Transports brought fuel, ammo, and new Mustangs. Silver plains contrasted with the black earth. Mechanics worked day and night. Pilots studied maps of Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Osaka. For the first time, the sky over the capital would no longer belong only to the Japanese. Across the sea, no one knew what was coming. Japanese officers believed B-29s would arrive unprotected, as they had for months. Zeros and Hayates took off confident they would face only slow, heavy bombers. But that morning, something was hidden in the formations. Hundreds of kilometers over the Pacific, flying silently above the B-29s, were the Mustangs. They wouldn't turn back. They wouldn't leave. They would follow all the way to Tokyo. And when the first Japanese pilots saw those silver wings, Japan's greatest advantage would vanish forever. Part 1 ends. To be continued. Part 2. The first escort over Japan. It was still dawn on Iwo Jima when the first pilots began walking toward their aircraft. The island, conquered only weeks earlier at the cost of thousands of American lives, remained scarred by battle. The smell of volcanic earth mixed with aviation fuel while mechanics worked under dim lights. Some men had fought on that very island days before. Now they watched a new type of weapon being prepared. It wasn't a battleship. It wasn't a bomber. It was a fighter whose mission could completely change the air war in the Pacific. Inside the briefing room, the silence was absolute. An enormous map of Japan occupied almost the entire wall. Red lines indicated the route, over 1,000 kilometers across the ocean, then Tokyo, and then the way back. There was no room for error, not enough fuel for unnecessary detours. If a pilot got lost, he would likely not survive. The Pacific was too vast for a second chance. The true enemy might just be the ocean itself. Commanders calmly explained the plan. B-29s would maintain formation while P-51s flew above, watching the sky. Unlike Europe, Mustangs here had freedom to attack before interceptors reached the bombers. The mission was simple on paper: stop any Japanese fighter. In practice, it meant facing the Empire's most experienced aviators. Just before dawn, the roar of Packard Merlin engines broke the silence. One by one, the Mustangs gained speed on Iwo Jima's runway. Small clouds of black dust rose as the planes vanished into the morning twilight. No one spoke on the radio. Ahead was only a blue immensity. The following hours seemed endless. The ocean below was uniform. No islands, no ships. Some pilots checked their fuel repeatedly. Others adjusted their mixture to save every liter. The Merlin ran smoothly, but any mechanical failure meant the end. There was no immediate rescue, no helicopters, no carriers waiting. Each man depended only on his machine and his discipline. Far away, Tokyo woke to another day of war. Sirens remained silent. Trains carried workers to factories. Residents were used to B-29s crossing the sky at high altitudes. Many believed Japanese fighters could still protect the capital, as bombers had almost always appeared unescorted. Then radars detected the massive formation. The alert was transmitted immediately. In minutes, engines started on runways across Tokyo. Pilots were ordered to intercept the B-29s before they reached industrial centers. Ki-84 Hayate fighters, more modern than the Zero, took flight. Traditional Mitsubishi Zeros and powerful Shinkais also joined the intercept. Everyone expected only bombers. No one expected dozens of Mustangs patrolling the airspace over Japan. At nearly 9,000 meters, an American pilot broke the radio silence. Contact ahead. Tiny dark spots appeared on the horizon, growing rapidly. They were the Japanese interceptors. Both sides continued closing in. The Japanese noticed something strange. The small spots above the B-29s didn't stay near the bombers. They were gaining speed. They were diving. It was clear these weren't at smaller bombers. They were fighters. The first Mustangs descended with altitude advantage, their engines roaring as they dove on the interceptors. The sky became a labyrinth of turns and fire. Americans used tactics perfected in Europe: attack at high speed, fire short bursts from .650 caliber machine guns, and return to high altitude. They didn't stay in slow turns against maneuverable planes. They used what the Mustang did best: speed, energy, and altitude. For the Japanese, this was a new reality. They had to divide attention between bombers and aggressive fighters appearing from all sides. Whenever they lined up on a B-29, a Mustang dove on them. The initiative had changed hands. Inside the bombers, crews watched through side windows. For the first time, they felt they weren't alone. This boosted their confidence enormously. While the P-51s kept the interceptors busy, the B-29s continued their course. This was the goal. Less time for the Japanese to attack the bombers meant a higher chance of success. On the ground, Tokyo residents saw white trails in the sky. Few understood what was happening, but defense officers began to worry. The Americans had solved the escort problem. Air superiority over their own territory was vanishing. Part 2 ends. To be continued. Part 3. The sky changed owners. As the battles continued over Tokyo, a silent transformation was taking place before both sides' eyes. For years, Japanese pilots had taken off believing that simply reaching the bomber formation was enough to begin the attack. Now that was no longer possible. Before they even reached the B-29s, they had to break through a barrier formed by the P-51 Mustangs. American strategy had completely changed the dynamics of the air war. For the first time, Japan was not just defending its cities, It was also defending its own fighters. The Mustang streaked across the sky at high speed, diving on any enemy formation that tried to gain altitude. Their pilots knew every second gained represented dozens of lives saved inside the bombers. They didn't chase a single plane for long distances. They had learned the goal was air superiority. They attacked, fired short, precise bursts, regained altitude, and searched for new threats. It was a discipline built over years of combat. There was no room for pride or individual duels. Every pilot was part of a much larger machine. On the Japanese side, the situation was becoming increasingly difficult. Many aviators facing the Mustangs were young men with only a fraction of the training veterans had in 1941. Japan no longer had enough fuel for hundreds of flight hours for new pilots. Industry suffered from constant bombing. Spare parts were scarce. Even modern aircraft like the Ki-84 often took off with mechanical issues. Still, those men climbed to the skies knowing what was at stake. Behind them were their families, their cities, and their country. But courage alone couldn't overcome the industrial gap. While Japan struggled to keep squadrons operational, the United States produced thousands of new planes every month. New pilots arrived continuously. Engines were replaced with ease. Each mission was part of a gigantic logistical system. Shortly after noon, the massive B-29 formations approached their targets. Below them stretched one of Japan's largest industrial areas. For months, these sites had been protected by distance. Now, that advantage was gone. When the bomb bay doors opened, silence inside the bombers was replaced by absolute concentration. Bombardier made final adjustments. The formation leader held course exactly as planned. No sudden maneuvers, no speed changes. Seconds later, hundreds of bombs began their long fall. Below, sirens echoed. Workers ran to shelters. Smoke columns rose, visible even to pilots fighting thousands of meters above. Despite intense anti-aircraft fire, the B-29s held formation. The work of the Mustangs had paid off. Many Japanese interceptors never even got close, but the mission was far from over. Now they had to return home. And the return trip was nearly as dangerous as the flight in. Several Mustangs had minor damage. Some engines vibrated more than usual. Pilots watched their fuel gauges closely. Combat had consumed more time than predicted. Hundreds of kilometers of ocean still lay between them and Iwo Jima. The formation reorganized and began the long flight back. Behind them, Tokyo vanished under a rising layer of smoke. In Japanese command centers, officers analyzed reports. Air superiority over their own territory was definitely passing to the United States. For American pilots, there was no feeling of invincibility. Many lost friends. Others never returned from the ocean after mechanical failures. Flying over the Pacific remained extremely dangerous. Each landing on Iwo Jima was met with relief. Over months, it became clear the P-51 was more than an excellent fighter. It symbolized the American ability to combine technology, training, logistics, and strategy. The plane alone didn't win the war, but it allowed bombers to operate safely, accelerating the end. After the war, many returned home with memories that would never fade. They had participated in a decisive moment in history, but they knew the human price of victory. Decades later, historians agree. The conquest of Iwo Jima and the arrival of the Mustangs changed the air campaign profoundly. By the end of the war, B-29s had long-range escort. History often changes because of a single innovation in the right hands. That day, Japan discovered the ocean was no longer a barrier. Their enemies no longer traveled alone. A new generation of pilots had crossed thousands of kilometers to fight over the capital. The war was entering its final phase. The roar of the Merlin engine has long faded. The white trails have vanished. Iwo Jima's runways are silent. But the image of those sleek Mustangs over Tokyo remains a symbol of how technology and determination can change the course of history.